I'm David Gonzalez-Rice. I'm Senior Vice President for Policy here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I'm pretty new here, joining the team alongside Kim and the other familiar faces to you all. Really happy to be on board and joining the HoUSed campaign call. We have a program for you today focused on the homelessness question and the crisis fomented by administration actions. So I'm going to quickly turn it over to our first pair of speakers. We have our own Ramina Davidson, Vice President for Field Strategy and Innovation here at National Low Income Housing Coalition, and then Eric Tars, Senior Policy Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. They're going to tee up the conversation with some national context, and then we'll turn to local partners who will talk about the view from DC and Chicago. See folks introducing themselves in the chat. Would love if y'all do that so we can connect with each other. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ramina.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. This is me, VP of Field Strategy and Innovation here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, where we are dedicated to achieving racially and socially equitable public policy that ensures that people with the lowest incomes are able to access and afford communities in their choice. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of time to set the table a bit about kind of the recent events that had occurred leading us to this call, and discuss a little bit about how homelessness solutions and how it's related to the lack of affordable housing. Can we skip ahead a slide? Beautiful. Okay. So a lot of the conversation that we're having today is really based, the history goes back a long time in terms of homelessness. And I know, Eric, you're going to cover quite a lot of the discussion of the timeline on homelessness itself, but really the most recent events for us that we were kind of paying attention to in this era of the work is in May of this year, we know that National Guard troops were deployed in LA at the request of the Department of Homeland Security to assist with deportations, and they were also used to intervene in terms of protesting immigration raids in Los Angeles. Also, further in July of this year, we know that the Trump administration released a handful of harmful executive orders, really kind of dictating the criminalization and the forcible imprisonment or the hospitalization of people experiencing homelessness, and as well as deprioritizing solutions that we know work, like housing first and harm reduction methods. And also we know that in August of this year, there was some discussion on August 11th in particular to raid homeless encampments in DC. And I know that our colleague Lara is going to talk some more about that in particular. Over the next few days, there was a lot of activity and work in terms of what's going to happen to folks experiencing homelessness in DC. And on the 15th, many of the homeless encampments were raided. And we also know that there has been some discussion since then, further work in DC, which Lara will get into, and also threats to other cities, including Chicago, Illinois, which Patricia will speak more on later on. So thank you both for joining the call with us as well. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay. And so this is a little bit of what I talked about. So that executive order on July 24th kind of really started talking about the end of support for housing first methods, and also reallocating federal grants to implement other policies that do not solve homelessness or housing unaffordability. And we know that we are facing increasing housing unaffordability because wages are not keeping up with rising rents, and actually no state has enough affordable rental housing for full-time low-wage workers. Can I hit the next slide, please? Okay. In fact, we know, based on our Out of Reach report that was released earlier this year by our research team, that there is a shortage of 7.1 million affordable and available rental homes throughout the US for extremely low-income renters. And extremely low-income renters it refers to a household income that is less than the federal poverty guideline, or 30% of area median income. Can I hit the next slide, please? Okay. This affects every single state in the country. So these issues affect absolutely every state in the country, and perpetuate increases in homelessness as housing unaffordability rises. So every single state that is implicated in sending National Guard to other states, every single state that is being threatened with federalization or more National Guard deployment is facing these kinds of issues. And so we are spending quite a bit of money in terms of federalizing local police, in terms of sending National Guard to locations that can really be used to subsidize folks who are living in unaffordable housing, or just plain housing folks who are experiencing homelessness. And I know Eric will talk some more about that. Can I get the next slide, please? Beautiful. So we know, and research has been showing us time and time again, that homelessness and housing and the lack of housing are linked. We know that vacancy rates, rent levels, eviction filings, and housing supply constraints are all systemic issues that lead to homelessness. And thus they require systemic solutions in order to make sure that we are able to end homelessness and increase housing affordability for folks. Can I hit the next slide, please? In fact, at this juncture right now, we have the opportunity to invest in crucial federal programs that we know solve homelessness, like Housing First methods. And we know actually that harmful methods like involuntary treatment can really be traumatic and perpetuate cycles of hospitalization and encounters with the justice system, which do nothing to end homelessness or housing unaffordability and actually make communities less safe. And we know that actually investments in community programs create safer communities, end homelessness, and support affordable homes for folks of all income levels. Can I hit the next slide, please? Beautiful. Okay, so the big really kind of takeaways for this are we know that homelessness is a housing problem. We know that the housing affordability crisis for the lowest income households is a systemic issue with clear solutions. We need further investments in these solutions that we know work. And none of these things will be solved. Homelessness, housing unaffordability, community safety, they will not be solved by wasting resources on federalizing local police and deploying National Guard troops. Can I hit the next slide, please? Finally, we have these multiple ways of taking action, and I know throughout this discussion with our multiple speakers, we'll be discussing lots of this. But really, the ways that we're kind of focused on here at the coalition are connecting with other people. Get and stay informed on what's happening. We understand that some places in this country are not getting the news that other places in this country are getting. So make sure you are all able to stay informed by what's happening, which is partly why we're holding this webinar, so you all can hear from folks in DC and Chicago. Coordinate with your local communities to prepare for whatever might be coming, whether it's the divestment of your own resources through National Guard to other communities, or whether you are in a city that might be facing this kind of threat by the administration. So coordinate with local folks. Ask your state and local officials to work with your communities to weigh in on whatever the federal administration is doing at the time. Also, make sure you're able to contact your members of Congress if you feel that you are able to. We know that this kind of federal takeover and treatment of our immigrant and unhoused neighbors is not acceptable. And we know that that money could be better used to invest in proven housing and homelessness solutions. We have a sign-on letter here that we can send. Thank you, Elena. The folks are welcome. And we also know that the Law Center has one as well that is as very urgent for DC specific issues. And I'll of course let Eric talk about that. And also, if you want to get involved and just don't know how, please, please, please reach out to us. We have organizers across the US that will be willing to help you plug in whatever way it is that you can. We want to make sure that we're here to help. And so with that, that is my spiel at a table setting measure. And I'll pass to Eric Tars from the National Homelessness Law Center.
Thanks, Farina. Thanks everyone for having me. Can go to the next slide. Lots of background that I have here is going to be somewhat duplicative and not not for this audience. For it's more for audiences who don't know as much about housing and homelessness. So we'll go through some of these slides pretty quickly. But next slide, please. First thing, I think the basic thing that we want to emphasize is that homelessness isn't solved by extra policing. If it were, we would have ended homelessness a long time ago. It's as a result of systemic causes. It's not people's individual faults. And so focusing on trying to deter people from needing to shelter themselves in public isn't going to work. And so we need to actually address the root of the cause. Next slide. But because we have been cutting supplies of affordable housing for decades and not replacing them, instead communities have turned to laws criminalizing being able to exist in public places, whether it's anti-camping, anti-sleeping, vagrancy, loitering. These laws aren't new, but what is new is that these laws rather than sort of organically popping up anytime there's a tent on somebody's corner and they call their mayor or their city councilor and say, I want it gone. Before, there wasn't a national push for the criminalization of homelessness. Next slide. That has changed over the past few years with the growth of the Cicero Institute, a billionaire-backed nonprofit that is out there pushing laws at the state level to criminalize homelessness, pushing misinformation about the causes and the remedies for the homelessness crisis. And its billionaire Joe Lonsdale is friends with Vice President J.D. Vance and now is helping to write policy for the White House and for HUD, for these other agencies. So that's a huge danger. Next slide. And so they have, but their initial push before they got into the White House was with a state level strategy pushing laws all across the country. We've been tracking them. Many of these laws have started off just saying they want to end funding for housing first and promote the criminalization of homelessness. Now they are doing other things like saying that anybody who's a service provider, if there are drugs being sold anywhere within a 1,000-foot radius, the service provider can be held criminally liable for that. Or they're trying to ban homeless service providers from entire cities altogether. So these laws are evolving, getting worse, and spreading across the country. Next slide. But what's going on at the state level is still going on at the local level. Since the Supreme Court decided its Grants Pass case last year, more than 300 cities have passed laws criminalizing camping on the streets, even if there isn't anywhere else where people can go. And that number continues to grow even since we collected those statistics back in June. Next slide. We also know that the issues of homelessness and immigration have always been connected, but we see this even more now. We see that back as early as January, we put out guidance to homeless service providers, trying to help them prepare for the potential for ICE raids. We are now seeing those raids having taken place. And we see that the HUD secretary is trying to make more non-citizen people homeless by taking away resources from them. And so then they're going to be on the streets. They won't have access to shelter because they're trying to take away shelter access. And so they'll just be on the streets and even more vulnerable to arrest or deportation. Next slide. We also see that the solutions they're pushing are very similar. We saw the raids, immigration raids, and the use of National Guard in Los Angeles focused on non-citizen populations. That has now moved to DC, where they are focused on unhoused citizens using the National Guard, using a surge of federal law enforcement. And so these techniques that they were experimenting on for non-citizens, like a very unprotected group, they've now moved to the next most unprotected group of citizens. And this is how the kind of creep of authoritarianism works. Next slide. We also have seen that the other solutions that they are trying to push are being experimented with. So with immigrants, they force them into this detention facility, Alligator Alcatraz, a big giant tent facility in the middle of nowhere in Florida. In Louisiana during the Super Bowl, the state governor came in and swept hundreds of homeless people out of downtown New Orleans, put them into a warehouse, again in the middle of nowhere, again not under great conditions, again at the cost of literally millions of dollars that could have instead gone to actually housing people for a year, but instead was used to put them into a warehouse under threat of arrest for about 30 days. So they can always find the money when they want to arrest people or lock them up, but it's never there when you actually need it for housing. So all this has led to, next slide, the executive orders that Romina mentioned earlier. I won't go through all the provisions, but it basically, we see this language used throughout it, very dehumanizing language, similar to how Trump started off talking about Mexicans as rapists and murderers. Now he's talking about homeless people as dangerous and deranged. All of it is designed to make it so that their rights can be less respected, and people are more willing to otherize and say, that's not me, it's fine to punish them in these ways. But what the executive order does is it directs the Department of Justice to reverse any legal precedents that would stand in the way of increasing civil commitments, involuntary detentions for people with mental illness, and to provide guidance on how states can lower barriers to commitment. And so there's a particular piece, the gravely disabled standard, where people can be defined as having a mental illness if they aren't able to take care of their own needs. And so just by the virtue that somebody is homeless, that proves they can't take care of their own needs for shelter, therefore they are mentally ill, therefore they can be involuntarily committed. So literally just because you can't afford the rent, you could be locked up, involuntarily committed, or arrested. It also defunds safe consumption sites and directs the Department of Justice to bring civil or criminal actions against people who are trying to do harm reduction. And it expands grants directed towards faith-based service providers who will create high barrier shelters, non-welcoming programs for LGBTQ folks. And so we see this kind of push to take away funding from the proven programs that worked and put it towards more high barrier programs that won't work. Next slide. It doesn't give any more funding for housing, for mental health programs, for all the things that we know work, or address overall the cost of housing. Next slide. And then we have the expansion of the kind of putting some of this into effect through the executive order that took over the Metropolitan Police Department in DC, mobilized the National Guard, and told them to get rid of the homeless under bridges. So that's been the next step. Next slide. And then there was even an additional executive order subsequent to that that said we're now going to create a National Guard force that can do this elsewhere across the country. So it's not just about what's happening in DC. DC is the test case, but it's coming to other places across the country. Next slide. And all of this again is costing 4 times, just to put the troops on the streets. And this was when it was just DC's National Guard. Now that they've brought in National Guard from 5 other states, the cost is far more than that. Again, they can always find the money for that, but they can never find it. Supposedly it doesn't exist when they needed to actually house people. Next slide. All of this, as I said, is textbook authoritarianism. And what we are now the front lines of the fight against authoritarianism. They're coming today for homeless people, tomorrow, whether it's LGBT folks, other undesirable groups that they're labeling as such. This is we need to stand up now. We need to stand up strong. We need to do things that we haven't done before, because what's happening today to one group will happen to more tomorrow. Next slide. And so all of this is to say the solution to homelessness is housing. The solution to authoritarianism is solidarity. We need both. We need to be working across groups, and coordinating strategies, and resisting together. So what can you do? Next slide. Can call Congress to pass the Housing Not Handcuffs Act. We got the message alerts that Ramina shared earlier. We know that in DC, they were using DC's own laws against the people. They said, we're not doing anything new here to criminalize homelessness. This is DC's law. We're just enforcing them. And so if you want to protect people in your city, get them to repeal their anti-camping, anti-sleeping laws now, and that way the federal government won't have them when they get there, or pass affirmative anti-criminalization legislation that says you can't enforce that unless you actually provide an alternative place where people can go. I'll drop in the chat our template bill that can help people do that. Join us, let us know how we can partner, and tell Congress, because the folks in DC don't have a voice. So in Congress, tell Congress to get the Federal National Guard out of DC. That's it for me. Happy to do questions.
Thanks, Ramina, and thanks, Eric. I think now we'll turn to our local partners, and then we'll have a Q&A panel with all four presenters at the end. So first, I'm happy to introduce Lara Pekach. She's Chief Advocacy Officer at Miriam's Kitchen. And then Lara, when you're done, if you'll pass to the next speaker, Patricia Nix-Hodis, Law Project Director at the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness. We'll hear from you both, and then we'll do a panel discussion at the end.
Great. Thanks so much, David. And thanks to everyone for having me on the panel today. I'm afraid I don't have slides, so you can just look at me or my name and title blown up, which is also entertaining. So as David said, I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer at Miriam's Kitchen. Miriam's Kitchen is based in Washington, D.C. We're an organization dedicated to ending chronic homelessness through case management, homeless street outreach, permanent supportive housing, advocacy, and very soon we are opening our new bridge housing site, also known as non-congregate shelter. So of course I lead our advocacy work. So part of my job is keeping track of not just what's happening on the ground in real time, but also, working to implement solutions to homelessness. I think just to set the stage a little bit, so in DC, we have about 5,000 people experiencing homelessness. About 1,000, a little bit more than 1,000 of those are experiencing homelessness as a family. And then we have between 800 and 900 folks who are unsheltered or who are living outside, depends who you ask on that number. So those are kind of the numbers that we're talking about. And of course, our local administration has been doing things to criminalize homelessness here and there over years, but has mostly just looked like, eviction of 10 encampments, but following their own protocol. So want to just underscore that even for our city, who maybe hasn't always had the best track record on, leaving folks alone who are sleeping outside, what has happened lately and what is still happening is a huge escalation. I mean, as Eric was, so well pointing out, we have a military occupation here in DC. It's something that's impacting entire communities and residents, not just our unhoused population. And of course, is impacting all the intersections therein. So I'd say when the executive orders first started coming out, I think we were just in a period of fear and anxiety, right? This is bad news. Something bad's going to happen, but like when and where and how. So that was a little bit just hard, right, to plan for. Hard for people living outside, experiencing that. Hard for organizations providing street outreach. Of course, when one of the first like DC specific executive orders was released, our local administration proactively complied. So they made a really concerted effort to, quote unquote, clean up encampments, disbanding tents, evicting people from the places that they had been. And then, of course, a few weeks ago, when the federal takeover really began, when we really saw the National Guard and all the military occupation come in, that's when things started to get worse. I would say it all kind of that week, it all started with rumors and screenshots of alerts that were sent to emergency rooms, kind of saying, hey, just so you know, we're about to like round up all the homeless folks and you'll see an uptick of people in your emergency rooms. Please be prepared for that and make sure you have a lot of staff. In the end, it didn't happen like that, but that I just share that because it was kind of bizarre that we found out that way, not kind of through any of the homeless services providers or networks. And so that's how we knew something was probably bad was about to happen. It was almost hard to believe, but then it didn't exactly happen that way. But then we did see kind of all in one night, squad cars and military kind of going from camp to camp to really make a concerted effort all in one night to move people from where they were sleeping and to throw away belongings and property. Of course, also, as you all know, because you're working in the housing and homelessness sector, a lot of the work is happening before that, right? So what we saw was egregious and horrible and traumatic, and also would have been a lot worse had we not had any heads up, had outreach providers not been working around the clock to tell people what was happening, to let people, to advise people to lay low, to move, that kind of thing. And then I think, so where are we now? I mean, that we have still seen like intermittent cleanups, but nothing so just like stark that we saw the first few nights. But I want to underscore also that just like across the city, that is not to say that things are not serious and that it is not like a really dangerous, scary time. There are checkpoints throughout the city. People are being pulled over for being Black and brown. People are being taken off the streets by ICE agents. So what we're seeing with our population of unhoused folks is kind of the intersections with all that. So thank goodness we are not seeing people rounded up for, arrested because they are homeless, but we're of course seeing people traumatized, seeing people evicted from their places. We're seeing people arrested a lot for crimes of poverty, right? So using the laws on the books to criminalize folks to arrest people. So public consumption, maybe a warrant that was out for your arrest. Traffic stops are one of the biggest ones just throughout the city, not necessarily for unhoused folks, where people are just being pulled over, asked for their ID. Maybe they're being pulled over for a cracked windshield, a tail light that's broken, and things are escalating into arrest. We're also seeing, we are seeing clients that are experiencing homelessness and who have recently moved into housing detained by ICE and disappeared. There are a lot of clients that we can't find. There are people that are being FD12'd. The data is actually hard to get on that. So it's been a little bit tricky to keep track of that. But all of that is to say, we generally don't lead with any messaging around our data about arrests because it almost under illustrates just like how bad this takeover is and how this like war is really being waged on our unhoused neighbors. I think the other thing I'll share is just that this is happening in tandem with huge federal overreach, which is a light way to put it. So one of the ways we are obviously seeing federal overreach is in the military occupation and kind of takeover of DC and the policing. But the other is that along with the work of the administration to criminalize homelessness, there's also just a war on crime in DC, right? And so that is something that is impacting our entire community. Congress has 14 bills that they are marking up on Wednesday that are just about DC, things that Congress wants to do to DC to change our crime laws. One of those is to further criminalize being in a tent. So when I talk about what you can do, I'll be pointing you guys to take action on those things, but really just across the board, taking every single step that they can to take away DC's autonomy, which is very scary for our ability, right, to not just to govern our own city, but to implement the solutions that we know work, to homelessness, to crime, to whatever the case may be. And then I think the other context that's important to know is just that this is all happening at a time when there's no new money for ending homelessness for individuals in the district. So for the second year in a row, our mayor has introduced a budget that has $0 for permanent supportive housing, you know, has put some money in for some shelter here while taking it away over here. So really seeing a net loss of resources to end homelessness and shrinking of programs that are proven to work at a time when the need is high, not just because of all the reasons we know that people are struggling when they're living outside, but also the constant threat, right, that they're facing by this federal takeover. So that is something that is obviously very concerning, but I don't think is a coincidence that, you know, coming off of what we're hearing from the federal administration of, you know, pulling away from housing first, ceasing to invest in the long-term proven solutions that we know work, we're seeing that on a local level too. And so I say that both to raise the alarm so that we can call of you all to action, but also because, like, to be honest, we're already thinking as a city about like what we're going to do if the time when our local government is investing in our housing solutions is no longer, right? So simultaneously thinking about how we are mobilizing our faith communities, the private sector, philanthropy to meet this moment. Hopefully it will not last, and we will be able to fund and implement the proven solutions that we know work through our government. But I don't think that that's something that we can take for granted anymore. So with that, I think I'll just make 2 notes on like how you can help and how to do advocacy. You know, at Miriam's, we lead something called the Way Home campaign. So of course, like if you're not already, be plugging into local ways to do advocacy within your own jurisdiction. But we need you here in DC, right? As Eric was saying, we don't have representation in Congress. So please, like, do be following like groups like the Homeless Law Center. They put out an action alert today specifically on the bill that I mentioned that criminalizes tent encampments in DC. It's being marked up Wednesday. So please do take action. It is especially powerful for them to hear from people outside of DC. So definitely raise your voice and talk to your council member about that. We also are partnering with Free DC, right? Because there's a lot going on in homelessness, but also right, just DC's autonomy. And so I point you to that resource if you want more information about what's going on in DC, if you want opportunities to take action to kind of help DC protect itself from federal overreach, but also to see if there are things that need to be built in your own cities, right? I mean, I think the one silver lining here for DC is that you know, we've never had statehood. So we do have strong organizers that have been dealing in the language of statehood and in, you know, issues with federal kind of overreach for a long time. And so, you know, I encourage folks to be thinking about how to do that in your own city. So I think with that, I'll stop. And I'm sure I left things out, so I'll be happy to answer them during the question and answer, or if my colleagues want to call me in on things. But if not, I will just turn it over to Patricia, and can't wait to hear what she has to share.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today. As we gather today, Chicago is in, I think, the second day of what is officially being called by the Trump administration Operation Midway Blitz, which is enhanced ICE enforcement. It actually, I think, started last week. Last week, there were arrests, ICE arrests at the domestic violence courthouse. So the place where, you know, people go to seek protection from violence and order of protection was the place where ICE was arresting people, which obviously deters people from seeking orders of protection. Today, there were verified reports of ICE being present at the criminal courthouse and the Cook County, which is in Chicago, or the Chicago courthouse of the Cook County court system. So yeah, there's definitely lots of reports and lots of happening, and also a lot of pushback among immigrant rights groups and groups all across the city. There was a very large protest, primarily organized by the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, which is also called ICER, on Saturday. There's another one tonight. So I guess the good news is that there's a lot of pushback, both from community organizations, our mayor, and our governor. And I'll tell you a little bit about what our organization has been doing, and also that our initial thinking was that the federal deployment was going to be the National Guard based on statements of Trump and the administration. And also what happened in DC. And then kind of along the way, it shifted to be more immigration focused. But a lot of people think that it will be this very terrible ICE enforcement, which will lead to protests, which will be kind of the pretext or excuse for sending in the National Guard. So we don't feel like we're, escaping the National Guard presence, and we're still preparing for that. Next slide, please. And I think we could go to the next one. So just a little bit about the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness. We have, we work in a variety of areas. I'm the director of the Law Project, but we also do policy and budget advocacy, organizing, community education and outreach, and data and research. And on this work in particular, this federal response work, our organization has really been working together really since mid-August to push back, try to plan, try to work with the city, the state, various entities to plan and be prepared. And I think the reason for that, or part of the reason for that, is we consider ourselves really lucky to have talked to the National Homelessness Law Center and other advocates in DC in mid-August and late August. I mean, not lucky to know, not lucky that it's happening, but lucky to learn about what happened in DC, and lucky to get the message that how important it is to plan and prepare. And we really took that to heart in what we've been doing since. So right after we were meeting with the National Homelessness Law Center, we had a meeting already set up with the city to talk about the executive order. But we did talk about the executive order, but we started talking to them about preparing for this federal deployment. And also based on our conversation, we adapted the Washington, D.C. Know Your Rights material to use in Chicago. Next slide, please. So this, and I'll have some links to the actual material, but this shows we had a little palm card about that we distribute at outreach. We also have a QR code on the palm card that links to our website. So as we get more and more resources, we put it up on the website. So one of the things on our website, for example, is federal land, a map of federal land. So those are places where we're encouraging people to avoid being, because they may be at heightened risk. And we also developed the palm card, which actually slowed us down quite a bit in coordination with the city and a group called All Chicago, which is our continuum of care. But it was worth doing that because then we had a broader reach, because the city funds what they call delegate agencies who do outreach. And so by getting kind of their buy-in or sign off, then all those delegate agencies were also distributing these at different locations all through the city that we on our own couldn't do. And then we also separately reached out to a number of mutual aid groups who are also distributing the material. And then we've been getting a lot of requests for the outreach materials from street medicine groups, from the Chicago Public Library, and other community groups. We also have a hotline number that we set up for this purpose. And so people could call to report any activity or if they were in need of resources. Right away, we worked on translating the slide into Spanish, and you can move to the next slide. And then based on requests from alder people and outreach workers and mutual aid, we also translated it into simplified Chinese and Burmese, and 6 other language translations have been requested and underway. And then also based on requests from the community, we adapted the Palm card for young people in particular. A lot of our youth drop-in spaces were asking for that. And then also a public transportation specific Palm card. We've had a meeting with all of the mutual aid groups that we know of in the city, and we tried to coordinate and get an idea of what areas of the city they work with, particularly if they have relationships. A lot of the mutual aid groups support specific encampments. So we're trying to coordinate if they already have relationships that those groups can go and find out what resources are needed. And can you move to the next slide? So we also, as this immigration issue, immigration enforcement became more prominent, we developed, we had done some of this before, but we updated it, some immigration guidance for shelter providers and drop-in centers. And then we've been distributing that. And we also have been distributing at regular outreach, immigration Know Your Rights materials by immigration rights groups. We've been having daily meetings between CCH, City of Chicago agencies, including the Chief Homelessness Officer, and then also the state office to prevent and end homelessness, the county, and other offices. So we're trying to do a lot of coordination. We've had a variety of asks of the city and other government agencies, including making more indoor locations available with a focus on low barrier settings. That's been kind of slow going, and especially on the low barrier piece, and hotel options for those who need it. We've asked for transportation options, storage options, and we have specifically asked the Chicago Park District to repeal its curfew and anti-camping provision that is in the Park District Code, and we're getting pushback on that. Currently, the city has added an additional 200 beds, and they're bringing 400 more online in the next 2 weeks. And then we've also had discussions with other legal aid organizations and the Illinois Attorney General's office, depending on, we don't know exactly what's going to happen and how it will impact the community, but we're kind of talking to other legal aid groups just to be thinking about what we could do depending on what might happen. We've had some positive developments, strong pushback from the mayor and the governor, and an executive order by our mayor, which really states strongly that the police won't be cooperating with federal troops or ICE or the National Guard. And it's not in writing or the executive order, but the chief homelessness officer also gave assurances that people can return to their outdoor location if they want to, which was an important thing for people. If they were giving up a location outside, they wanted to be sure if they wanted to go back that they could. And then I just want to reiterate again how grateful we are for the support of the National Homelessness Law Center and all of the other groups in DC for sharing their experience and tips, because we felt like it helped us so much and put us in a much better position than we would have been otherwise. So thank you.
Patricia, thanks so much. We're going to have some discussion for just under 10 minutes. I'll wrap up with a very brief policy update for you all. I want to thank everyone for the perspective they've shared. And then Romina has some questions. I know there are questions in the chat I hope we can answer too. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And thank you, Patricia, Lara, Eric, for talking through some of this stuff with folks. We do have some questions in the chat and the question answer that I'll do some asking, but I am a little bit curious in general around, Patricia, you had mentioned the support of your mayor and your governor to push back against some of these policies. I know, Lara, some of us in DC we're in a different situation. But I am curious about, do you feel, Patricia, that was helpful? And is that something that you think would be helpful for other folks in the US if they're under similar threat, that kind of pushback?
I mean, I think it's helpful. You never know with this administration if that makes you more of a target by speaking out, but I feel like I think it's been helpful, and I think if nothing else, it's been very helpful to come out strongly to say the Chicago Police Department isn't going to cooperate. And there were other things in the executive order about not just about the Chicago police not cooperating, but that they have to be in uniform, that they can't wear masks, that they have to identify themselves to sort of get away from that, the ICE agents who like are unidentifiable. And, I think it just sends a strong message to the police. I think there are some people who question like how much control the mayor may or may not have over individual police officers, but I think it's a strong message. I don't know, how it will. I don't know that it will impact what the administration does, but I think for city agencies and state agencies, it sets the tone.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Lara, I don't know if you have anything to add to any of that. You don't have to.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think this is a situation in where DC is very unique, and that the relationship between our mayor and president has always been unique. But it is just reminding me of one thing that I didn't mention, which is also just how important it is to also be building relationships with organizations that are working on criminal justice advocacy and organizing, right? Just because it's when it comes, there's a lot going on. And so to just be like the other things that Patricia mentioned and that I mentioned, that's one that I just highly recommend.
That's really helpful.
I'll just round it out, and this kind of goes to one of the questions that Jerry asked in the Q&A, which is we are working on guidance together with the National Alliance to End Homelessness that kind of draws on all these lessons learned that you heard from Lara and Patricia, and should be coming out within the next week, I hope. But one of the major lessons is that don't assume that just because homeless people might be targeted in your city that other folks are going to be aware of that, or in a number of cases, like had some of the advocates we know not been in the right meeting at the right time, homelessness would not have been part of the agenda that it was with, some of the rallies and some of the conversations with officials on how to respond. And so one of the most important things you can be doing now is building those relationships so that when the folks are having the meeting about designing the rally or the meeting about who's going to attend the meeting with the mayor, like the homelessness and housing advocates will be part of that conversation. And if they can't, that somebody else will carry their message for them. But don't assume that you're going to be invited if you haven't built those relationships already. So that's literally something that everybody can be doing right now. And whether or not Trump does come to your city or not, it's going to be stuff that's relationships that can pay off in other ways, in other advocacy down the road.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I appreciate that. We did get some questions generally around organizing and the importance of organizing. It's absolutely something that we're deeply invested in the coalition and in our partnership with you all as well, to boost some of that work. I am a little bit curious about, we had some discussion around Cicero tactics, and then Patricia, you discussed a little bit about what y'all are doing in terms of know your rights work, but any kinds of legal strategies right now to address some of the work that's happening or has been happening? Of course, nothing that's pending potentially, but just there's a lot of cases up in the discussion of, we saw, right, that LA had sued the administration around National Guard deployment. I'm just a little bit curious about any knowledge you have around any kind of legal protections or legal advocacy that's happening right now around these issues.
Go ahead, Laura.
Well, I was about to say one thing before just deferring to you because you know better, but a legal adjacent thing I would say is like build up your bench of attorneys, right? There are just a lot of people being arrested and cases are taking a long time. So that's something that we're hearing a lot from our partners. I know that our OAG has sued the administration, but I'll turn it over to Eric, who knows much more on the legal strategies.
Yeah, I will say, don't count on the courts to save you. What we have seen is that there are cases that have been brought, and often they are able to say retroactively what happened was wrong. But what's been really challenging, for example, in DC, was the wording of the executive order was so vague, and the statements that were made were so vague that prior to them actually taking action against people living on the streets, like the president of the United States was threatening homeless people with arrest for not being able to afford the rent, and there was literally nothing we as lawyers could do to stop it ahead of time. And so then the strategy became, how do we get as many people out of harm's way as quickly as possible? And then, the lawyers can deal with, some of the ways that people were being harassed. But and even in the cases where there are legal hooks, in many cases, what we're seeing is the courts will say, we're not going to issue a preliminary injunction. We're not going to issue, or that preliminary injunction will get issued, but then it'll get stayed on appeal, and the harm will continue to go forward, even though, ultimately we might win the case. So yeah, I think that the advice is don't count on the courts to help you, and prepare anyway, and particularly, prepare for trying to do some of that harm reduction by having a bench of attorneys who can, help with individual cases. But in terms of systemic cases, it's really been a challenge.
Thanks, Eric. Go ahead,
I
Claire.
also just want to say one more thing, which is Eric mentioned it. I know it seems obvious, but like one critical thing I forgot to say is like just move as many people indoors as you can, right? And I think, not just like helping people to know where to go or how to lay low, but if this is months down the pike for your jurisdiction, there's probably something in the pipeline that could be sped up, and so in DC, we're talking about things like, a bridge housing site that's like stuck and not coming online, or a site that was just closed, but the government still owned, or, our housing vouchers process is taking months too long. Like all of those things that you've probably been trying to get your city leaders to do anyway, like to use this urgency to just push all that stuff through so that people are not outside, because it's just so much more dangerous than it was just 6 months ago.
Thanks, Lara. I know we're like close to time. Patricia, do you have something quick to add?
I was just going to add, like, our focus right now is trying to think about if people are arrested, how can we get help for them in their criminal cases, and kind of sharing out resources for connecting with public defenders or that sort of thing. So we're kind of focused on that more than broader litigation right now, anyway.
Oh, super helpful. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all so much for this discussion. We'll have the recording for folks. Appreciate you all being on, and we'll be in touch. David, do you want to go ahead and give like in 1 minute?
I've got a 1-minute policy update. In addition to just plus oneing what our speakers had to say about telling your representatives in Congress that you expect them to do better by the District of Columbia, and engaging your local electeds to tell them that you expect them to do better by folks who are homeless. We are currently having within Congress a debate about whether to pass a short-term continuing resolution, a longer-term continuing resolution, or to play the game of chicken all the way to a government shutdown. We've put out resources on the continuing resolution, kind of take action resources at NLIHC talk about this. The point I want to make in the context of this conversation today is that a longer-term continuing resolution or a government shutdown are mechanisms that the majority in Congress can use to give the executive branch, the current administration, a freer hand in various ways, from rescissions of funds to reductions in personnel to the kinds of actions they're doing without congressional oversight that we see all the way from the response to homelessness to the language around immigration. So while you're engaging your members, encouraging them, we're calling for the short-term continuing resolution that buys Congress time to pass an actual funding bill in which Congress exercises its power of the purse and does not defer to the president. So that's one thing that can help with all the issues that are at stake today. We appreciate your partnership, and do watch for the recording, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.